Welcome to AEC Unscripted M&A Edition, your go-to podcast for unfiltered conversations and expert analysis. Brought to you by Stambaugh Ness.
Welcome to AEC Unscripted. I'm your host, Jeff Adams, the Director of Mergers and Acquisitions at Stambaugh Ness. Today, we're going to be exploring M&A through the lens of a data guru. I'm delighted to have joining me for this episode, Nick Decker, the Director of AEC at Egnyte. Egnyte works with architecture, engineering, and construction firms to help them securely manage project data, improve collaboration across distributed teams, and strengthen governance around one of their most valuable and often overlooked assets, information. As M&A activity in the AEC industry continues to accelerate, data organization, security, and operational scalability are becoming increasingly important factors in both valuation and post-transaction integration. Nick brings a frontline perspective from working with firms navigating growth, private equity investment, and acquisitions, helping leadership teams turn their data environments into the strategic advantage rather than an operational risk. Nick, thank you so much for joining me today and welcome to AEC Unscripted.
Thanks, Jeff. Pleasure to be here.
Well, hey, before we dive into today's topics, please tell us a little bit about yourself and about Egnyte.
Yeah. So my role here at Egnyte is to, as you stated, work very closely with our strategic engineering firms, primarily around their ability to execute their projects more efficiently. So within the A&E space, how that manifests is through their ability to get the right data to their users as efficiently as possible, allow them to make the most of their institutional knowledge, the firm intelligence that they built up over decades. As it pertains to the M&A world, we're seeing a lot of adoption of tech as an accelerant within the M&A frame, and folks are looking strategically at their tech stack. From the sell side, how can this help my valuation, my multiples, if our firm is ready for this next generation of technology, if you will? And from the buy side, it's all about how can we get the most out of our investment? How can we unlock the most synergies and the intelligence of the firm we just acquired? There's a lot to unpack there, but as far as Egnyte as a company, at its simplest was started as cloud file storage, and we've continued to evolve that to include things such as data security for highly sensitive markets. And then this AI front over the last 2 or 3 years has really put the acceleration of our product line specific to what engineers and architects and even construction firms do on a daily basis.
Great. And we're going to dig deeper into some of that through our conversation today. So let's get started here. One theme that we keep hearing in transactions is that IT gets invited to the table last, oftentimes after the deal closes. Why do you think technology consistently shows up late in AEC transactions?
Yeah, I have a lot of conversations with folks in the industry around what they're doing in the M&A market. And IT is always an afterthought. It's always, oh, well, we'll handle that during the integration phase. Like, we have to get to deal close. We need as few distractions in the diligence process as possible. And really, firms that have taken the inverse approach there, saying technology is the DNA culture of our company. Frankly, a professional services firm, the way in which you collaborate is your intellectual property. It is the way in which your business operates. In most instances, you're not buying yellow iron in the world of construction. And so what else is there other than intelligence in the people's heads that are sitting delivering?
Right.
And so unfortunately, IT has not been seen as a strategic lever in that diligence process and the pre-transaction. The firms that are starting to look at technology as that accelerant are, one, moving faster through the integration process, but two, they're also out competing their peers, whether on buy side or sell side, because they have something unique to tell as far as the story of the market. And it's not just, hey, here's our balance sheet and here's our client list, take it or leave it. Well,
Sure. So what actually happens inside a firm when IT integration starts post-close?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things is that you have to go through the table stakes process. You have to get everyone onto secure platforms and you have to give them logins and computer or however you want to go through that process. And that's never going to change. But what is flipping on its head is how quickly a firm can be integrated from a collaboration. So again, when we talk about project delivery, a lot of that is how your engineers or your architects can talk to each other within the context of a project. And even a couple of years ago, the baseline number for integration was 18 months. From a tech standpoint, your firm was not fully integrated into the new parent for 18 months before you could deliver a project together. That's wild because now we have clients that are coming to us and saying, we have to integrate from day one. We need this key engineer on this project in order for us to be successful and so on and so forth. Like we have 2 days to figure this out.
Yeah.
And that's really only possible if you're getting them into the core systems, you're getting them into the documentation and allowing them to function as a core part of the newly acquired entity, if you will. That integration waterfall map, the schedule that people used to take as gospel, it used to take a quarter to do this or a quarter to do that. Now, what used to take a quarter now takes a week. The acceleration is happening incredibly fast.
What's
And
driving that acceleration?
frankly, there's pressures to get more from your multiple. From a mindset standpoint, we're all aware that the multiples have gone up. And in order to make it make financial sense, you have to get synergies faster. You can't wait for a 3-year payback on these engineers getting up onto the projects and so on and so forth. You have to be able to upsell, cross-sell, be able to show your worth as a cohesive firm and not a constellation of offices. And that's something that oftentimes gets overlooked is you're not just buying a headcount. A 50-person firm is not just a 50-person firm. You also have to put to work their reputation, if you will, and be able to win over new clients and make the existing clients happy.
I hear disruption, right? When we're starting to put these teams together, a lot of disruption going on. Where would you say engineers and project teams feel disruption the most?
Yeah, I think when you're being acquired, there's inherently going to be this angst of what it is that is expected of you and what is this new firm going to look like and so on and so forth. There's already enough disruption when it comes to the M&A market. You pile on this concept of cloud collaboration or working with new tools, wholly and completely different from the way you've worked out of files and folders and emails for a long period of time. And then obviously it goes to the next level with AI, the looming changes to the industry here. That's just so much change to absorb. You know, I kind of relate it to an organ transplant. In order for an organ to be accepted by the body, there needs to be a matching blood type. And I think that is amplified even further when you talk about matching technologies and making sure that you're non-disruptive to employees that are already very concerned about what this new market may look like, both again, from an M&A standpoint, technology. I'd be happy to go further into what those technologies are and what's maybe most disruptive in the near term versus long term. But as of right now, it's just a matter of keeping people in seat and as productive as possible and not scaring them away. The angst is high enough as it is in the industry without piling on more concerns.
Yeah, we might dig deeper into that a little later on here as we move through the process. If firms could change one thing about timing, when would you say IT should enter the M&A process?
Yeah, the rough goal, so to speak, you hear about closing dinners, right? Like, you know, is at the table at that closing dinner to celebrate the new acquisition. Usually neither CIO is at that table. And that's usually like a tell of how important tech is or isn't within this process. Yes, you'll have the mergers and acquisition team from both sides. You'll have the existing buy sell side leadership and HR folks. All very valid. Tech's never quite literally at that dinner, at that table. I think as part of the diligence process, tech needs to have a seat at the table. They need to be ensuring that there is a match between the two firms. And if there's not, that's okay, but you need to be able to mitigate that somehow. And that needs to be calculated into financial models, if you will. The flip side of that is also true in that tech can be an accelerant and make the acquisition more valuable. And what that means for unlocking intellectual property stuff. Again, there's a lot to be said on that topic, but it is something where it will only become apparent if both tech teams are sitting and allowed to collaborate before the transaction takes place.
Well, you bring up a great point there. I mean, we've been talking about, integrating systems thus far, but you mentioned intellectual property. And when we talk about IP and AEC, what are we actually referring to?
Yeah, I think the pithy quote here is in AEC, balance sheet is your firm's earnings. Like that's the financial sense, but the archive that the data that you have is the firm's memory. If you're not putting that memory to work, you're not getting the most out of this acquisition. What that tactically means is how you deliver projects, who you're delivering those projects for, what you're doing and what was successful, and frankly, what was learned within that project delivery cycle. And that needs to be recycled into that. If you're just acquiring a firm and you're putting all of their legacy data off into a storage bucket somewhere and you're never touching it again, you're leaving a ton of value on the table. What I tell people is that information needs to be searchable by every engineer or architect. It's not just that this is accessible, it needs to be searchable, but that this also needs to be indexed and made intelligent in a way that can be shareable. So what that means, there needs to be a compiled list of lessons learned over the history of the firm. There needs to be a compiled list of what clients are doing projects for, what project types are created, who are the firm's experts. That's often missed. I live in Indiana. There's a crazy number of roundabouts around me. Like, who is the firm expert for doing roundabouts within Indiana DOTs? That's a tactical example. If you go acquire a firm, you don't know who the expert is within that domain expert, you're not tapping into the expertise of the firm that you paid a high price for just now.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, you mentioned the term indexing a while ago, indexing, structuring your data, and you were touching on that a little bit, I think, with some of your examples there, but what do you mean by that?
Yeah. So the industry, unfortunately, has always been at the mercy of files and folders. And this goes back for days like filing cabinets used to be a thing. They still are in some instances. And if you don't have a Dewey Decimal System, you don't have a way to understand what is in which filing cabinet, you have no way to go find the information that you need in the moment. The same thing holds true in the digital world. I go search in your files, Jeff. I have no idea where I'm going to find it. I don't know how you structure your folders. I don't know what your file names mean. There's no intelligent way for me to understand quickly. And so I'm going to abandon that task and I'm just going to start from scratch. Unfortunately, that's the wrong way to approach it. And being able to understand what's inside the files, inside the data is where the magic happens. And so in today's world, that's actually really easy to do, to allow cloud software to index inside the files and make everything searchable. So the tactical example is, where have we done a project for this client in the past? How did it go? Some of that may live in a CRM. A lot of that's going to live in an email inbox. Some of that's going to live in a file structure. But if I don't have the ability to go search for that the way I do searching in Google for a website, I'm not going to tap into that information. I'm just going to start from scratch. And that's really what we're trying to get over as far as the technology standpoint, is allowing people to leverage what already exists, right, and be able to start from 80%, not from zero.
Well, if I were being completely honest, when I think about how I organize my personal files, I feel like I do it with a certain degree of logic and try to be very careful about it. But when I'm looking back at it, whether it's to walk somebody through something or I'm trying to find it myself, I realize I'm not very good at organizing things. It's very challenging to find even my own data. But yeah, when you're talking about the world of M&A and you're acquiring someone else's data that's been collected over years by different people, and now you're trying to work through that, definitely can be challenging. Even in today's world now, one common theme I hear somewhat related to this is all the different communication platforms we have nowadays, right? Outlook, Teams. I mean, the heck, even inside Teams, there's chats, there's Teams channels, right? Trying to remember what you're on. You get on your client's Teams channel sometimes. It's not just your own. and people texting you. You're trying to remember, where in the world did I see that? I know I came across something related, but you can't find it. So yeah, this whole concept of being able to index and make it searchable. That's the word you used a while ago, right? To be able to find it.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And everyone can feel it from their personal lives. Like you said, whether it was text, whether it was an email, Teams chat, what have you, amplifying this in the project delivery world, people roll on and roll off of projects as well.
Absolutely.
So in addition to all of the fracturing of the systems themselves is the additional permutation, if you will, of who that communication was with. So you can imagine, email is the easy example. Did Jeff roll off this project? Oh no, well, with Jeff, with all of that contextual knowledge about what happened within that project, did we file Jeff's emails? Did we capture all of his team channels and so on and so forth? Probably not. And so being able to connect those systems as best as possible, look a little bit into the future of connectivity with these systems, protocols within the AI world called MCP and some of these other things are making this easier. It is allowing for a more dynamic kind of rolling process of being able to query the Teams chat, as well as the Outlook inboxes, the project management system, as well as the file system and so forth, and do so much more easier. But it's still not perfect in the sense that you still have the human component. Did they put the stuff in the right location and so on and so forth? The other component that I do want to bring up here very quickly is the aging workforce. So, we talk about this generation of folks who have a really rich context of decades of being in the industry. They're about to retire.
They are.
Lose all of that context as soon as they walk out the door, unless you're capturing it in a way that's searchable the next year. We have young engineers that need to come on board and need to learn quickly. And if they don't have that Yoda, so to speak, that a guru that's going to tell them how to do the work, they're going to have to take 2 decades in order to catch up. But we can compress that down and allow for that knowledge transfer to happen much faster, both within the context of a project as well as a career. I'm very excited about that concept of knowledge management within a firm as well.
Well, I think our listeners probably are feeling and sensing the pain that you're describing here, can relate to it really well. You were mentioning a while ago that when firms didn't index or structure their data, it gets lost, right? In the world of M&A, it just gets lost. People come, people go, those relationships come and go, and all that data that was gathered over the years through that, if it's not properly stored, searchable, and structured in a way to make it retrievable to future, let's call it generations of employees, it's lost as if it never existed. So yeah, I think what you're saying there resonates big time, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah. As an engineer myself, I didn't go to school to do scavenger hunts. That's really not what the job is. It's to go build a bridge or design a building. And that's what gets me excited. Varying statistics in the industry will tell you an engineer spends about 20% of their time looking for data. That's within their own firm, in their own projects that they already know really, really well. Amplify that for someone's new systems, new data you're already nervous about an M&A acquisition, both on the buy and sell side. How do you make that not a scavenger hunt? We have the technology, the $6 million man, we have the technology to make this happen. Why are we still reliant on this disjointed way of operating our business? Is really kind of the dichotomy that the industry's at. And I will say the firms that are pushing the limits, they're getting acquired much faster. They're getting acquired for a higher premium. The firms that are on the buy side that are doing this from day one are doing a much better job and able to take on more acquisitions more quickly than their peers.
Talk about some of these tools, Nick, that you're talking about that can structure this data that way and help you avoid the scavenger hunt. I love that term. I think accurately describes the pain many of us feel.
Yeah. I think tactically there's a few things at play. One is frankly just moving off-prem into the cloud. So if you're familiar with SharePoint, you're familiar with your personal Google Drive or Dropbox or what have you, those technologies, when you go to search for something, it's also looking inside the file. So back in the 90s, early 2000s, there was a concept of very heavy enterprise content management, tagging of files. What type of file is this? Who edited it last? technology has been able to abstract a lot of that away, make those system tags, and do a lot of that behind the scenes. Same thing with Scan PDF. About all of the old files after a project, you had a banker's box of physical paper, and now you have to go scan that in. Well, that was never searchable. Someone had to go manually name that. We're now able to read that page through technology like OCR, which is basically making that scanned text readable. That's all baseline stuff. A lot of that's been around for well over a decade. And that's great. That's the starting point to be able to look inside Excel files, PowerPoints, Word documents, so on and so forth. The next generation of this is indexing the design files themselves. This is things like reports, BIM and CAD models. This is things like GIS for photogrammetry. So being able to look inside of a photo and see where it was taken. I don't know if you know this, but when you take a photo, whether it's through a drone or through your phone, the system actually knows where you were located when you took it. That type of stuff is now searchable. And so I can say, give me all of the pictures in Carmel, Indiana, or in San Diego, California, and it will give context of just the photos within that. The next iteration of this is making that contextually aware and connecting those systems. So what used to be a very bespoke integration, things like connecting my email server back to my file server and so forth, to take IT 6 months to make that happen, I can now do that with a click and say, add connector to my Outlook inbox. And I can search inside my email, inside my calendar, inside my file system, and inside my Microsoft Teams or my Slack, all from one search bar in about 10 seconds. And that is absolutely an amplifier. If me as one user, I'm one of 1,000 in this firm, can now all do that. That's where the rubber meets the road. And that what used to take 20% of my time to find that information, which is 1 day a week, finding data, doing the scavenger hunt, can now be compressed to maybe an hour, maybe less. That's real time savings. And we went from 8-hour billable to maybe 1 hour of increased productivity. And that shows up in the bottom line. That is a very real thing that can be value capture to the firm.
Yes, it can. So let's transition here and talk about AI for a little bit. So once data is structured, AI suddenly becomes possible. And we're seeing that affect acquisitions. Where are you seeing real AI applications inside the design firms today?
Yeah, AI is a muddy term right now in the industry. I think
It is.
your listeners, when they hear the acronym du jour AI, they're thinking, oh, well, ChatGPT, it helped me plan my kid's vacation or spring break. I just asked it where I should go to dinner with my wife for a date night or whatever. That's fine, but that's not productive. That's not
pretty good in that, though.
I mean, it is pretty good, and I can't complain. That's a nice starting point. But the reality is, we as an industry have what we call a gap or an exposure overhead, where AI, in theory, can do 60 to 70% of an engineer's task and an architect's task. We as an industry are adopting AI at about, depending on who you ask, 5% to 20%. So we're talking about a 40 or 50% gap of time that can be automated in theory. What that tactically looks like today is things like templating reports. So I go out into the field, capture a bunch of information, and I need to then type it up in a report. I'm probably pulling a template. I'm starting from scratch. I'm hand typing everything out. That's fine, but that can be at least get set to an 80% draft by just uploading the photos and saying, tell me what's in it. Here's the location and the context that I'm working in. Go and give me a draft back to my corporate template. It's not replacing the engineer, but it's getting them from the 0% or the 10% starting template to an 80% draft and allowing them to focus on that last 80% and do the validation. Trust but verify. Same thing holds true when we talk about project closeout. So no one ever thinks about project closeout as an opportunity for improvement, because oftentimes you're under a deadline to get things out by 5 p.m. on a Friday in order to meet contractual deadlines. And then you show up Monday the next week and you're on to the next project and you haven't properly closed out and organized that information, captured that intelligence. That's a net new capability that AI can also benefit your firm. And that's things like organizing the data, capturing lessons learned so it can read through your emails and say, oh, well, it looks like we had issues with this weld detail on this particular file. Hey, maybe we need to pull this back to the content library team in order to do that more efficiently moving forward, stuff like that. It's not just about the tasks of the day-to-day engineer, the net capabilities as well that often get overlooked.
Hey, you mentioned AI could be used 60 to 70% of the time, but we're only seeing like 5 to 20% adoption. Why the resistance in the industry to adopt AI, do you think?
Yeah. So there's a couple components here around why AI is not adopted as it could. A lot of this, frankly, technology has moved so fast over
Yeah.
certainly the last 3 years, but even more so over the last 6 to 12 months, that the workflows and the processes are not quite caught up to where technology is today. And that speed will only continue to increase. There's also, to be totally honest, there's the complexity of professional liability. We as engineers, as architects, as contractors, have an obligation to our documents and be held liable for the contractual deliverables that we're providing in this project. And because of that, we have to be very, very careful. This industry is highly conservative, rightfully so, but it's not about delivering an AI output that's low risk. It's about getting people from a 0% draft to an 80% draft. And I think that's where that delta or that gap is really easy for us as an industry, or easier to go aside. As an engineer, I should never be starting from scratch on anything. I should be copying and pasting. I should be using AI to get to a closer draft. The industry as a whole is much more comfortable doing proposals and back office. You talk to almost every CEO, they'll say, oh yeah, we're using AI. Our proposals team will do drafts in Microsoft Copilot and they make PowerPoints and we're great at AI. That's fine, but that's not what's making you money. To be totally frank, you don't get paid for proposals. You get paid for the delivery phase, and the industry is not caught up to what you can do within the delivery phase that is not going to expose you to any additional risk, but is going to save you a heck of a lot of time. And that is things, again, like drafts, like research. Code compliance is a really big one. Working within a waterfall of different codes and requirements within your locality, your municipality. Have AI do the research for you and give you a first draft of what your project can and should be within the context of the region which the project is. Those types of things are not at the adoption level that they can and should be. And I think hopefully the industry looks very different in 6 months.
One common thing I hear around this, Nick, is that you say people that start out, right, when they first come in, let's say just whether it's engineer, architect, or really any skill, when you first enter the workforce, you're doing the entry level jobs, let's call it, right? And that's where you learn. That's where you on the job training happens and all. Now we got AI technology that comes in and says, hey, let it take care of 80% of that. And now you're just trusting but verifying.
Yes.
Right. And at some point we're going to have full adoption and just readily accept it. I always hear people talk about this concern of, well, that on the job training goes out the window now. How do you take somebody out of school and say, you're now a PE?
Yeah.
You're the PM now.
Yeah.
On the engagement. Where do you see that going? And any thoughts on how that evolves?
So yes, I think there's a couple different dimensions here. One is you need to make your principals much more scalable. Their leverage needs to go up by an order of magnitude. And that can be done through technology. It used to be that they had to sit in the office side by side, every single new engineer, coach them through months of here's how we write a letter. Here's the voice of our emails. All of that can go away through technology, capture how they as principals have run their projects in the past and scale that down to the new employees. From the new employee standpoint, to be totally frank, this next generation is tech native. They won't do the old school sit next to me and show me how you stamp an email and ink your name and so on and so forth that I had to go through, unfortunately. That new generation isn't going to sit for it, and they're going to go work somewhere else that doesn't make them go through that process. But at the same time, in order to get them that intelligence, knowledge, there are a ton of learning tools that are free and available to allow them to explore and get up to speed much, much faster. Things like Notebook LM have been incredible, where they can dump in a whole corpus of information. Hey, here's how we operate as a firm. Here's our standard operating procedures. And then it'll output podcasts. It'll send them through quizzes. It will do all of this knowledge transfer and allow them to learn in the format that they're comfortable in. And then they can go back and ask questions. It's not just, hey, here's the process. They can come back and ask intelligent questions of the principal. And that's where the principal can be much more high leverage and scalable for junior engineers and the junior PMs. And so I think that is a totally different model that the industry is not ready for, or rather, they have to rethink that onboarding process. And that holds true again for acquired firms, new employees straight out of school, people that are transferring industries as well. These people are incredibly smart. You just have to give them the tools in order to get up to speed faster.
We're seeing buyers increasingly acquire capability rather than just backlog or geography. What are your thoughts on that around acquisitions of AI technology?
Yeah, I think in particular, there's some early data that suggests that this is the next frontier. Multiples are going up for tech-ready firms. And what that means is firms that are fully cloud native. In some cases, they have software development resources already on staff. As a sell-side firm, you would not have heard that 2 or 3 years ago. But now that's an amplifier for their multiple. They can prove to the acquiring firm, we are now scalable. You're biting off a small acquisition. Maybe it's 25 people, maybe it's 200 people, but they are now scalably, their leverage is outsized because they have tech adopted. And so from a valuation standpoint, from a sell side perspective, that should be the best investment you could ever make. If you're preparing for a sale, go get your tech house in order. As far as the buy side standpoint, we've seen industry leaders. So, AECom made a buzzy acquisition a few months back of Consigli, who's this tech forward CM and automation tool. And it's cool. I think what they're doing is, they being Consigli, is interesting, but why this is so telling for the industry is that this is a perfect proof point of a tech first company that is infinitely scalable. And AECom saw the writing on the wall and they're worried that they're going to get disrupted. And so when the top players in the market are paying that level of premium for a tech company, everyone else should be taking notice as well. The old days of just acquiring headcount for headcount and paying the standard 5x multiple or whatever it is that comes through the door isn't going to fly 2-3 years from now. And so get on board now and start being a little bit more discerning about the segment or the market tech forward as well. What I will also say as it pertains to acquiring capabilities, I heard a quote from one of our CIOs who is very, very discerning about what they do in the acquisition process. And their North Star was, we cannot be a constellation of offices. We have to be one office. What that means is you have to have a firm that can provide a cohesive solution to their client. It's not just, hey, this office does this particular service and these people do this particular service and never the two shall twain. That you now have to be a solution provider and not just a services company that has charges by the hour. That component of capability scaling is really interesting, particularly when it's tied to the technology side.
You mentioned the AECom example a while ago. We're actually seeing the reverse too, where AI technology focused companies are acquiring engineering firms, right? Saying rather than trying to get the engineering industry to adopt what they're selling and convince them they should buy, it's more of, we'll just take what we're already doing and know where the future's taking us, and we're just going to make it happen inside your firm. So
spot on. Interesting tech companies are often seen as the minnow getting gobbled up by the sharks that are the AEComs of the world. That story could very well flip in the next year or two, where the tech companies are even more gobbling up the service firms themselves. There's also this rule that has become much more prevalent in the industry called a forward deployed engineer that I think is the canary in the coal mine for the industry, where it is someone who basically sits in a professional services office. They'll sit next to your engineers, your architects, your project manager, and they will essentially learn your process and how you do work. And in the back of their head, they're sitting there reconstructing how to generalize this process across the firm. They're looking for scalability options and discovering the way in which you deliver work. And then they will take that back to a tech team and say, let's go automate this. Forward deployed engineer is incredibly valuable. They talk about leverage and scalability. This is one of those roles that the forward-looking firms are already employing. If you don't have an FDE yet, forward deployed engineer, you might in a year or two, because these are the people that are looking for those opportunities to scale and will be able to tactically apply AI, not just in general, but to your business process and map it exactly to how you do steps and how you deliver value. And that's going to be really interesting to see over the next year or two.
Yes, it will. So as we wrap up here, Nick, let's talk about some of the practical takeaways here for firm leaders. If a firm plans to sell in the next few years, what technology steps should they start right now?
Yeah, first and foremost, get from on-prem into the cloud. The value of being on-prem nowadays is not what it was pre-fiber internet. You may be concerned about people having fast access to laser scans or large BIM models. To be totally frank, getting to the cloud is a non-negotiable at this point. And there's really no reason to hold back and not invest in that space. It's affordable, it's doable, it's a well-charted path. It will be a foundation for everything else. All of the security, AI, tooling, and collaboration across offices, all of that requires some level of movement to the cloud that will pay immense dividends downstream, particularly on the sell side. In addition to that, there needs to be some level of experimentation in the firm, creating some culture of experimentation with new technologies, going to identify within the firm the people who like to tinker, which oftentimes engineers love to tinker. Go find those people that are hand raisers and say, here's some budget, go try out some new tech. Show us what you got. People will do this nights and weekends because they love it. It's exciting for them. Allow them to push the boundaries a little bit and create those feedback loops and instill some culture that can then be scalable. Those two things are tactical pieces of this are move to the cloud and experiment, because if you're not experimenting today, you're in trouble.
Yeah, real going to get left behind, right?
Exactly.
So what technology questions should sellers ask potential buyers?
Yeah, I think as a seller, I am concerned enough about my employees and how disruptive the HR side of this acquisition will be. People concerned enough about their job and so on and so forth. And you can't really change or quell that concern. What you can do is have a conversation about how disruptive their day-to-day work is. And today's world, the day-to-day delivery is often done through the lens and the work surface of technology. It's BIM, it's CAD, it's collaboration for teams, it's all of that other stuff. And so understanding that component as a sell side firm needs to be well understood, because that disruption coupled with the acquisition disruption could be really painful and cause some churn for the folks on staff. So I think that question alone, being able to really understand how disruptive the new technology at this new firm going to be to my employees is something that is not asked nearly enough. I've seen a number of acquisitions where the buy-side firm, the acquiring firm, has essentially rolled back all of the tech adoption and ways in which employees could work from home. They could pull information up from their phone, and they have to go back through on-prem VPNs and stuff like that. Employees were like, no, I'm not going back a decade. Like, I'm sorry. I have a way, my work-life balance is much better because I have the technology. I have the ability to work from home 1 day a week. I can reply to an answer because I have all the files and folders and things on my phone. If I'm out to dinner, and I can do that stuff. I don't have to be in the office replying to that stuff. That's where the rubber meets the road. It can cause a lot of concern for a sell side.
All right, I'm going to ask you a question now, Nick. The last question is the one that the firm leaders need to get their pencils and pens out for. I'll take some notes here, and that's looking ahead 5 years. What will separate the most valuable AEC firms from the rest?
Yeah, it's the ones that have viewed technology as a scalability lever. If you're only looking at your scalability and your efficiency through the lens of headcount, that's the total wrong approach here. Its efficiency will inherently amplify over the next 5 years. And if tech isn't a key component of that strategy, you're already lost. Headcount is not going to be enough in this next generation. I think the other piece here is think at it through the lens of your clients that are going to be successful are not solving these problems and selecting technologies for themselves in a bubble. It needs to be through the lens of why this is valuable to the clients, because that's where the value of the firm lies is, again, repeat business for your client. So I think that is something that people are still trying to figure out how to make your client happy, but at the same time, capture value from being more. I don't have a silver bullet there on how to capture more value, but also be more efficient. Clients are asking for these things, and it needs to be considered certainly in the next strategic cycle.
Well, before we wrap up here, Nick, give your elevator pitch here. Tell us why firms should contact Egnyte.
Yeah, Egnyte is the foundational layer for everything else that we talked about around a cutting edge A&E or AEC firm through migration to the cloud, better collaboration across offices, a more secure environment to take on sensitive projects and government projects. The next iteration of this and where our clients are pushing us is the adoption of AI and searchability. So unlocking that intellectual property, making your clients more efficient. And AI is going to be a key cornerstone for the future of Egnyte and specific to this AEC.
Well, Nick, this has been very educational for me, and I'm sure it has been for our listeners as well. I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you, Jeff. It was a great chat for me. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to AEC Unscripted, the Mergers and Acquisitions Edition. I'm Jeff Adams, and it's been a pleasure guiding you through M&A through the lens of a data and information expert. Please remember to subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcast. And until next time, keep pushing forward.